There is a particular kind of silence that ancient ruins carry with them. It is not empty, but heavy with questions that refuse easy answers. You will feel that silence as we walk among crumbling plazas and carved stone, and you will sense how history can be more mysterious than legend. This video will follow those questions through evidence and imagination, to look at the Maya mysteries that still puzzle us. The Maya civilization stretched across a landscape of jungle, savanna, and coast, and it lasted for millennia in different forms. Cities rose and fell, dynasties carved their names into stone, and complex calendars governed daily life. Understanding that long arc depends on archaeology, ethnography, and careful detective work, because the Maya left sophisticated records and many deliberate silences. We will need to read both what they wrote and what they chose not to write. By the end of the Classic period, many great Maya cities were abandoned and overgrown, leaving plazas empty and stairways for moss. The collapse of these classic cities is one of the great historical mysteries without a single simple explanation. Archaeologists first noted population decline and political fragmentation, but those observations only raised more questions about human decisions, environmental pressures, and regional networks. The story of that decline is complex, and it forces us to confront how fragile complex societies can be. One dominant theory argues that severe droughts hit the southern lowlands during the late Classic period and stressed agricultural production. Tree ring data and sediment cores suggest droughts occurred, but the relationship between climate stress and societal collapse is not straightforward. Drought could have amplified existing problems like overpopulation, soil depletion, and political strife, creating a cascade of failures across irrigation and food systems. The real question becomes how climate mixed with human choices to produce the collapse. Another line of evidence points to endemic warfare between competing city-states and internal political violence among elites and vassals. Stelae and murals sometimes record battles, captive counts, and punishments that read like a chronicle of regional conflict. Warfare could disrupt food production, trade routes, and social cohesion, turning fragile alliances into bitter rivalries and abandoned towns. The archaeological signatures of fortifications and burnt structures suggest that violence was a significant stressor during the terminal Classic centuries. Environmental degradation, including deforestation and soil erosion, is another key hypothesis that helps explain systemic stress. Cutting trees for fuel, construction, and agriculture could have reduced rainfall recycling and depleted soils across centuries. When these ecological processes reached tipping points, agricultural yields likely declined, and the web of supporting infrastructure began to fray. Taken together, drought, warfare, and ecological collapse form an interlocking set of pressures that could lead to societal failure. Many scholars now favor a multifactorial view in which climate, conflict, and ecological degradation interacted in different proportions across regions. The Maya world was not monolithic, and collapses happened unevenly and at different times across city networks. This plural explanation means that local choices and contingency mattered as much as broader structural forces, and that different cities collapsed for different combinations of reasons. The complexity of the evidence forces historians to be cautious about grand narratives of sudden doom. The Maya ballgame is one of those scenes where ritual, sport, and power blur into one potent spectacle. Massive stone courts and carved ball players show a ritual with public audiences that reverberated through politics and religion. Archaeologists have debated whether the ballgame was a metaphor for celestial cycles, a diplomatic stage, or a deadly spectacle used to reaffirm elite status. The truth likely lies in the overlap between sport, cosmology, and political theater. Some of the most striking evidence suggests the ballgame functioned as a political instrument, where rulers displayed power and negotiated status. Stelae depict rulers presiding over games, linking athletic performance to dynastic legitimacy and ceremonial display. Victories and defeats in the arena could have real political consequences, and the games may have served to dramatize alliances, rivalries, and treaty terms in an emotionally charged public forum. That performative quality made the ballgame a central element of civic life rather than just a pastime. There is also strong ritual symbolism attaching cosmology and sacrifice to the ballgame, with connections to May's gods and the underworld. Texts and murals sometimes show decapitation or captive sacrifice linked to the game, moving it beyond mere sport. Such symbolic meaning would have intensified the emotional resonance of these public events and tied communal identity to sacred narratives. The ballgame thus acted as a bridge between the city and the cosmos, between temporal power and spiritual order. Maya art speaks in a dense language of myth, politics, and social order that resists easy translation into modern categories. Stelae, murals, ceramics, and painted codices combined images and glyphs into narratives of dynasty and deity. Interpreting that art requires reading both the literal scenes and the metaphors embedded in gestures, costume, and iconography. Each image can reinforce a ruler's claim, retell a sacred story, or encode a political event in a symbolic grammar. The decipherment of Maya glyphs over the 20th century unlocked much of that visual language, but many passages remain ambiguous or lost. Once thought to be purely symbolic, the glyphs turned out to record historical names, dates, and events in complex ways. This linguistic breakthrough transformed our understanding of Maya art, but it also revealed the selective nature of ancient record-keeping. Surviving inscriptions may emphasize triumphs and omit failures, and important parts of the cultural script may never have been recorded at all. For centuries, the jungles seemed to swallow entire cities, hiding monumental centers beneath vines and canopy, and adventurers spoke of lost citadels waiting to be found. These lost cities were real, but their discovery was rarely the romantic fantasy imagined in early accounts. Many sites were known to local peoples and reused across generations, and the narrative of discovery often ignored indigenous knowledge. Recent technologies have changed the map, revealing vast urban and agricultural systems that challenge older assumptions about population density and organization. LiDAR, a remote sensing technology, became a game changer by penetrating vegetation and mapping ground features across wide areas in surprising detail. Suddenly, archaeologists could see road networks, terraces, reservoirs, and dense settlements hidden under canopy cover. These LiDAR images have recalibrated estimates of Maya populations and urban complexity, revealing a landscape of engineered agricultural infrastructure and interconnected cities. That technological leap forced a reassessment of how the Maya sustained large populations and how regional systems interacted. The post-2012 cultural storm was as much about Western apocalyptic imagination as it was about Maya calendrics. And the message got distorted in popular media. The Maya did not predict an apocalypse in 2012, and their calendars represented cycles rather than terminal endings. Scholars and indigenous communities repeatedly tried to correct the record, but the 2012 myth persisted because it satisfied modern anxieties about renewal and ending. Understanding that phenomenon requires examining how ancient knowledge can be repurposed as modern prophecy. For the Maya, the completion of a calendrical cycle was a moment of ceremonial renewal and reflection, not an ultimate annihilation of the world. Monumental inscriptions celebrate transitions and refoundations, emphasizing cyclical time and rebirth. This cosmological perspective invites us to see how different cultures frame endings and beginnings and how modern interpretations can distort original meanings. The 2012 story reveals more about contemporary fears than it ever did about ancient Maya intentions. Despite major advances, the Maya world keeps holding pieces of information, like a locked chest with missing keys, and some voices were never written down. The lives of ordinary people, the full extent of ritual practices, and many local histories remain partially invisible. Archaeological silence is not absence, but a different kind of record, shaped by preservation biases and the ephemeral materials that rarely survive the tropical climate. Accepting those limits is part of responsible historical inquiry, and it also opens space for humility about what we claim to know. Religion and cosmology in Maya society were complex systems that integrated astronomy, ritual, and social hierarchy into everyday governance. Some rituals were public and monumental, while others were private and invisible to the archaeological record. We must infer the missing pieces from iconography and comparative ethnography, but those inferences carry uncertainty and assumption. The danger lies in reading modern expectations into ancient practices, which can misrepresent lived religious experiences. One of the most poignant aspects of Maya studies is the living continuity of Maya peoples who survived and adapted through centuries of change. Their languages, crafts, and communal memories carry threads of continuity, even when political centers collapsed. Engaging with contemporary Maya communities offers not only ethical obligations, but also rich perspectives that can correct academic blind spots. The modern Maya are not relics, but active participants in interpreting and translating their own histories. There are things we may never know about the Maya simply because materials decayed, stories went unrecorded, and voices died with the people who held them. Perishable materials like textiles, wooden ritual objects, and oral histories often vanish without a trace. That loss creates a kind of permanent historical ambiguity, and it forces us to accept provisional truths rather than definitive answers. Yet the beauty of this ambiguity is that it invites imagination, guided by evidence rather than the comfort of complete certainty. Recent scientific tools have broadened the horizons of Maya research by offering new lines of evidence through isotope analysis and ancient DNA studies. Isotope ratios in bones can reveal diets, mobility patterns, and even drought stress in populations. Ancient DNA has started to show connections between predynastic and modern populations, though preservation in tropical climates remains a challenge. These methods add biological depth to the archaeological narrative and allow more nuanced reconstructions of past lifeways. Fieldwork continues to uncover evidence for sophisticated water management systems, including reservoirs, canals, and terraces that supported large populations. These engineered landscapes reveal long-term planning and adaptation by Maya communities across different environmental zones. Understanding those systems challenges older notions of simple slash-and-burn agriculture, showing instead a mosaic of technologies tailored to local conditions. Such findings complicate collapse narratives by showing resilience and innovation alongside vulnerability. Political life in the Maya world revolved around networks of city-states, alliances, and rivalry, creating an unstable balance of power that could unravel quickly. Kings and queens used monument building, marriage, and ritual to assert control and legitimize authority. This politicking produced both cultural fluorescence and vulnerability when disputes escalated into sustained conflict. The archaeological record shows cycles of centralization and fragmentation rather than a single, linear progression of state development. Trade and economy sustained Maya cities through networks that moved obsidian, jade, cacao, and salt across long distances, knitting communities together in practical interdependence. Markets and tribute systems made rulership possible by channeling resources toward monumental building and elite consumption. Disruptions of those networks by drought, war, or political collapse would have had ripple effects that are visible in shifts of material culture and consumption patterns. These economic signatures help archaeologists trace when and where stress hit the system hardest. Social structure in Maya cities combined ritual obligations, kinship bonds, and labor demands into a cohesive but unequal society that depended on elite direction. Monumental construction projects required both coercion and cooperation across large labor pools. Understanding who benefited and who suffered during times of stress reveals much about resilience and collapse dynamics, and it humanizes the archetypal images of kings and pyramids. Those social patterns left traces in burials, household archaeology, and settlement layouts. Modern archaeology is changing not just through technology, but through ethical engagement with descendant communities and collaborative research practices. Indigenous knowledge holders increasingly guide research agendas, offering oral histories and cultural context that enrich interpretation. This ethical turn moves archaeology away from extraction and toward partnership, and that alignment creates more accurate and respectful narratives. It also reframes the questions we ask about the past, focusing on relevance and reciprocity instead of mere discovery. The future of Maya research will be interdisciplinary, combining paleoclimatology, remote sensing, genetic analysis, and local knowledge in unprecedented ways. That synthesis promises to reveal patterns that single disciplines could not detect on their own. But technology alone cannot answer every question, and interpretive frameworks still require cultural sensitivity and methodological humility. The next decades will show us both deeper insights and new uncertainties as evidence accumulates. There is a philosophical payoff in studying the Maya mysteries because incompleteness invites reflection on how we relate to the past. Unanswered questions force us to balance curiosity with the acceptance that meaningful human lives can leave partial traces. That tension between evidence and imagination forms the heart of historical empathy, making archaeology not just a science of objects, but a practice of listening. The ruins themselves become teachers about the limits and possibilities of human knowledge. Let us return to the big unsolved questions and where current research leaves them standing as open invitations rather than closed cases. The collapse of classic cities is likely a mosaic of drought, warfare, and environmental depletion, acting at different scales. The ballgame retains layers of political, ritual, and mythic significance that resist single explanations, and Maya art continues to speak in polyvalent metaphors. Lost cities keep revealing themselves, but some domestic voices and everyday rituals may remain forever out of reach. Recent discoveries have shown that the ancient Maya were experts in engineering, agriculture, and landscape management in ways that surprise many observers. Reservoirs, terraces, and raised fields demonstrate pragmatic responses to difficult environments and demographic pressure. That evidence complicates the narrative of inevitable decline by showing ingenuity and adaptation alongside vulnerability. The picture that emerges is not tragic simplicity, but complex human agency, responding to changing circumstances. Some mysteries will likely remain, including personal experiences and oral histories lost with generations of speakers and artisans. For that reason, some pasts will forever be partially known, like melodies with missing verses that we can only infer. But the ongoing work of archaeologists, historians, and descendant communities makes history a living conversation rather than a closed book. Each new discovery rewrites questions and invites fresh interpretations about how the Maya lived, loved, and struggled. If there is a unifying lesson from the Maya mysteries, it is that human systems are resilient and fragile at once, and that societal persistence depends on environmental balance, political flexibility, and social cohesion. The rise and fall of cities offer cautionary parallels for modern societies facing global change. Thinking globally about these ancient cases provides contemporary value without simplifying their particular histories. The Maya past is a mirror that reveals the complexity of human choice under stress and the consequences of collective action and inaction. There remains a responsibility in how we tell these stories, especially after centuries of romanticizing ruin and underestimating living cultures. Respectful storytelling means foregrounding descended voices and acknowledging the limits of archaeological interpretation. Responsible narratives also recognize that science changes, and that new methods will continue to revise what we think we know, that humility is not weakness, but the strength of scholarship committed to truth and dialogue. In the end, the Maya mysteries are both an intellectual challenge and a moral reminder that the past is shared inheritance, rather than a spectacle for private consumption. We inherit questions, responsibilities, and living traditions that demand attentive listening. If these unsolved puzzles intrigue you, they should also invite you to read deeper and to support research that centers indigenous knowledge. The past is a conversation we can all join, and the Maya continue to speak through stone, story, and living practice. So, what will we remember after all the debates and new technologies have run their courses through the archives and the jungle? We will remember complexity, contingency, and the stubborn presence of human creativity amid constraint. The Maya did not leave us tidy lessons, but they left compelling questions that sharpen our thinking about sustainability, governance, and cultural resilience. Those questions are worth preserving, researching, and living with respectfully. If this exploration gave you a new perspective, let it change the way you think about ancient civilizations and modern responsibility. Appreciation for the Maya should come with curiosity, humility, and respect for the people who carry that legacy forward. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe and join us as we continue to explore the deeper questions of history and human experience. Thank you for watching. And remember that the past is never finished until we stop asking good questions.